Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking some time to join us this evening to talk about our annual writing competition. We'll start with some introductions, but you'll get a chance to meet folks throughout the course of tonight's presentation. But I'm Sam Rayburn, the Director of Programs for the National Science Policy Network. And I work with Forefront on running this writing competition. And so you'll hear later on this evening from Debbie Stine and Rachel Owen, who, among many other science policy related initiatives, are editors at Forefront, which publishes the briefs and science notes as part of this competition. So you'll get to hear more from them later. We also have Joshua Hooks and Natalia Harris, who are winners of last year's competition. And so you'll get a chance to hear from them in a little bit as well. First, I wanted to just make sure that we had a chance to see the general agenda of what we'll talk about this evening so that you have a sense of what we'll be going over. I'll give a brief overview of the competition itself, what it is, what to expect, some of the key milestones, and where you can find more information to stay connected along the way. We'll have a chance to hear from Natalia and Joshua from their experience last year. Debbie will give a presentation about policy briefs and science notes, particularly with the lens of what this competition is looking for. So it's a great primer, it's a great refresher, and it's a great way to be plugged into specifically the competition itself and what these pieces of writing will look like. And then at the end, we'll actually have some time to do some breakout rooms with you all so that you can start brainstorming your ideas, thinking about workshop titles and subject matter. And at the very end, Rachel will join us to go over the Forefront website, submission form, what that looks like when you're actually ready to submit, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the very end. But I just wanted to first take a 30,000-foot view of what the competition is. This is our 5th year running it. We are looking for submissions from NSPN members. It could be individuals or teams of members to submit a 1,000-word policy brief or science note. And like I said, Debbie will get into that more later. The deadline for submission will be May 15th. So there is time to get your ideas together and write and make sure that you have everything in order by the time that you are ready to submit. And this is our website, scipolnetwork.org/writing-competition. It will be your repository for everything related to the writing competition, timeline, everything like that. I'll go over in just a few moments, but those are the highlights for the competition itself. Here are some of those milestones for the competition. A full timeline is on the website, but I wanted to pull out some of the main flow of what the competition will run like. And I wanted to share some information about the competition portion of this, right? So this isn't just about submitting a policy brief. The policy briefs will undergo an editorial review from Forefront. Authors that meet the criteria will be able to take feedback from that editorial review, make revisions, and submit those revised briefs. Once those revised briefs are submitted, we will have a panel of judges review those final briefs for a series of rubric items, and that'll be on the website. I'll get to that in just a moment. To select winners. So there will be a first, second, and third place policy brief or science note with awards of 1,000, 750, and 500 respectively. That can be split among those authors if it's just one or if it's a team of authors. In addition, while the judges are doing their prize review period, we'll also be monitoring web traffic analytics related to how many people are actually viewing and reading the policy briefs for some People's Choice Awards. And those will have some professional development funding opportunities for those top 3 People's Choice Award winners, where those individuals or teams can seek professional development funds up to $500 to travel, to do events related to their policy brief, to bring in folks if they're part of a group for additional professional development, something related to the work that they've done on the brief itself. This is a snapshot of the website itself, where you can see links to past winning briefs, the program timeline in full, an FAQ that we'll add to and keep updated as we get questions throughout this iteration of the competition, as well as some of those evaluation details. We're working on a revised version of the rubric for this year, so you'll be able to see exactly what the judges will look at when it comes to reviewing those final briefs, and then a recording of this session. So if you want to come back and go through anything, you'll have the opportunity to rewatch this, and we'll also make all the slides and resources available there as well. So lots of good information there. And then I have my email on here just for any questions. I can route you to the right person, whether it's about the competition itself or more specifics when it comes to other opportunities with the writing competition itself. So these are other ways to connect. I throw these on here because we will be promoting some of the other writing events and opportunities, so that if you want to stay up to date and in tune with what's happening, be sure you're following us on these places. And particularly our YouTube library already has a lot of different writing resources, so you can check that out and see some of the things, particularly from last year's competition, if you're interested in that as well. And so this is what the website looks like itself. This is what the top of the page looks like, and then links to all the relevant areas where you can go. You can see past winners. You can read more about the FAQ. You can look at the competition details, which I just went over. And then, of course, that timeline is up here as well. So you can see the milestones and dates and everything in between on the website. So with all of that, I'm going to stop my share and allow us the opportunity to move along. I'd like to next give our past winners a chance to introduce themselves, let us know who they are, what they're doing, and what brief they worked on last year, and just a little bit about the experience of going through the writing competition. And so we can pass it off to them. But Natalia, you are first up on my screen if you're ready.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Natalia Harris. I'm a fourth year PhD candidate at University of Michigan in biological chemistry and drug discovery. Also getting a minor in science policy, which is what brought me to this competition. I worked on No Choice, No Voice, an abortion policy brief from last year, and I can hand it off to Josh.
Sure. Hi, nice to meet everyone. I was a postdoc at Johns Hopkins in biomedical engineering at the time when I was writing this for the competition. I'm now a AAAS Science Policy Fellow and working for NIH, which has been a really cool experience. And I worked on expanding telehealth access for all Americans, lessons from COVID-19.
Excellent. Thank you both for joining us. We'll have time for a Q&A later on in the session. So if you want to ask questions of folks that have been through the process before, and in particular, folks that actually impressed the judges and won as a result of their work, you'll have that opportunity. But also, if you have questions or anything throughout, feel free to throw it in the chat. We'll be chatting back and forth as well. So feel free to reach out to us that way as well. Let me see. So I think with that, Debbie, if you are ready, we will pass it over to you. I'm going to put a copy of Debbie's slides in PDF form into the chat so that you can save that as a copy. Like I said, we'll upload it to the website later, but I will pass things off to her for an introduction and to lead us into policy briefs and science notes.
Sorry. Before I start, as I'm sort of saying, I would like to get some additional maybe comments from Natalia and Joshua. So, and I think that will help set the stage for what I present. So, the first question I have for you too is how did you come up with the idea about what topic you were going to work on? So, Natalia, let's go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, no problem. So I worked on a policy brief with 4 other PhD students. We kind of came together because we are in the same school of policy here at the University of Michigan. And we all came from very different backgrounds and all came forward with a topic that we thought was very current and important for people to read about. And then we all kind of voted on it, and that's the one that we ended up choosing.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, and what about you, Joshua?
Yeah, very similarly, I met through the science policy group. It was another postdoc and a grad student. We all had very different backgrounds. We all kind of pitched ideas. One of the individuals had a background in telehealth and after kind of talking about it, we thought that was the best topical topic for us to go forward with.
Mhm. And how did you, so it's not, I'm trying to remember, I did remember reading your activities, but how did you, like figure out a plan to work together to kind of separate the workload, but, between now and sort of the deadline? So Joshua, why don't we start with you this time?
Sure. We kind of set a loose meeting schedule through the deadline, and we initially all just kind of did our own independent homework, found topics that we thought were interesting. Eventually around the second or third meeting, we kind of split up who wanted to cover what sections, and kind of gave ourselves a lot of independence. And then we met together to try to normalize the tone and fit it all together.
Okay. And what about you, Natalia?
Very, very similar. Once we had voted on the topic, I think we agreed to meet every other week because writing doesn't move as quickly in the beginning when you're doing research and stuff. And then the meetings were like every other day at the end there. And then split it up. Someone was getting the intro, someone was getting our topic 1, someone was getting our topic 2, and the other person was getting recommendations. And then halfway through, we kind of swapped, and everyone got a different section that we were given, like the other person's section, just to read it over, make sure everything looked right. And then we each made a figure as well that we thought fit with each section.
Okay, great. And what do you think was the biggest benefit that you got out of, working on the competition? So Natalia, we'll start with you this time.
So personally, working in science policy here, we do a lot more very niche policy writing. And I think it was really nice to get like a broad policy brief experience that like you are doing writing so that like the general person could be reading it, and getting that writing down in a way that's not like, oh, there's someone on Capitol Hill, they might be reading it, but it's more for the average person. And I think that was really valuable.
Okay.
So my background was almost entirely in research and writing scientific articles. And so I was always interested in science policy, and I found it to be a really good exercise in learning how to restructure for a science policy memo, and really leading with the what and the kind of the grabber to get the public's attention.
And how did it help you when, since you're now a fellow, how did it help you during that process?
It helped me a lot. So part of the AAAS Science Policy Fellowship process is you have to write a brief. So it gave me some great experience trying to work on that before applying to AAAS.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Natalia? How it'll help you with your career? I guess you're hopefully getting toward the end of your PhD.
Yeah, I have one more year left. I'm pretty excited. But I came back, I'm writing a manuscript after that. And even my PIs that I worked for were like, wow, when did you get so good at science writing? I'm like, it's policy writing, baby. It made me better.
Okay, well, that's good. Yeah, so this is really great. And then the other thing is that what was interesting, I think about both of yours, but my memory might be wrong, is that part of the thing that's important to me is that not only that you write these things, but you get the message out there, right? So lots of times there's a lot of writing competitions, and so we kind of like someone at the last minute, because that was our first year, thought, okay, what we really need to do is try to have a session, and we're going to do more of that this year, to say, okay, well, don't just write something about it, but try to use your analysis to move public policy, get publicity for it at least, and that kind of thing. So what did you do to publicize your your memos and so forth. Natalia, why don't we start with you first?
So we used all of our social media platforms, sent it to pretty much every school that we are part of here at the university. So we are all from different departments, sent it to all our different departments, shared it on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, everything that you could think of, and then sent it to particular people in policy and representatives that we thought would be of interest as well.
And did you hear anything back from anybody?
No.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, well, it's first steps.
That happens though.
Yeah, what about you, Joshua?
So I don't think any of us had the largest social media footprint, but we did share it on kind of on my Twitter, and then just kind of spread it along family and friends, spread it through the Hopkins Science Policy Group, and use those networks that were available to us.
Okay, great. Thanks. So I appreciate it. And so last thing is, what is the main piece of advice that you have for this group that's entering the competition this year? So let's start with Joshua.
I'd say try to start early, just to be able to have time to bounce ideas off each other, to figure out what works, what's catchy, what doesn't feel like it's working well, and just to give yourself that time buffer.
Okay. And Natalia?
Definitely pick a topic you're passionate about, but also can be impartial about at the same time. And also try to pick something, because I know Josh talked to you, he did telehealth and COVID-19. We did telehealth and abortion policy. So both things that were like very much on people's minds and very important in the moment. And so either it brings light to something that is really important that people aren't paying attention to, or is already on people's minds. So something more current.
Yeah, great. No, that's wonderful advice. So thanks. And if anybody has, questions, for either the two of them, just go ahead and enter them in chat now, so you don't forget them. and then we can go back later at the end when we have sort of the full Q&A, but that's always what I suggest. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to ask everybody to do, because I see a lot of familiar faces here, is that please turn on your cameras if possible. So because otherwise, I'm just talking to black boxes. A few of you have, so it's not only black boxes, but the more of you who do it, and I can sort of, it also helps me gauge, are my jokes hitting, or, like I have, you can't see my t-shirt here, but it's a Triple S t-shirt. It says, I tell science jokes periodically. And, only a certain kind of people get my jokes, is all I can say. As I personally think I'm hilarious. I would enter a humor competition, but alas, not everybody thinks that. So, okay. So first I'm going to give you sort of an overview of the the general topic of different science, technology, policy writing modes. Then we'll talk about what's a policy brief, what's a science note, and some of the key policy writing principles that you should always keep in mind, regardless of what you're writing. And then we're going to have a breakout session at the end where we're going to have you think of drafting your title. So first, you're going to have to pick between whether or not you're going to do a policy brief or a science note. And then I'm going to ask you to go into these breakout groups and try to draft the title of what it might be. I think it's really good to kind of start out with something. I mean, obviously you're going to change it over time, but it's really good to kind of brainstorm that activity. And, at the end of the slide deck, I have, some examples and things like that. So just to kind of get you thinking to take that initial first step. And, I think there's a lot of benefits of working with a group, but sometimes it's also nice to have an individual writing sample as you apply for jobs and things like that. So either way is fine. Doesn't really make too much, difference to us. But try to always also think about that as something you might want to consider. Okay, so lots of times, in our science and technology policy education world, we only talk about a few of the different ways of communicating. our scientific and technical knowledge to policymakers and the public. But there's really lots of different ways. Even this is not everything that you can do. And so, there's these like policy news reports, like I work with the faculty at West Virginia University to do policymaker guides. I did it also when I was a professor at Carnegie Mellon, that are in energy or water or carbon dioxide reduction, all sorts of different things. And those tend to be pretty long, National Academy's reports, even hundreds of pages. But they tend to be worked on primarily by committees or at least a team of people, if it's, say, at a think tank. Then you might have something like a policy position article, and that is something you might write for, say, Scientific American or Issues in Science and Technology, where you're taking a particular position, you think some action is warranted. Then we have policy briefs, which we'll be talking about in a second, but policy briefs are meant for the broader public, and tend to be, sort of educational in nature and focusing on a particular topic. Science notes, which we're also going to talk about more, they're more kind of collecting what do we know, but they're not going as far as saying, okay, this is what we recommend. Policy memos are meant to be internal activities. So I think the reason why policy memos started as one of the big focuses in science technology policy is that if you do get, say, a AAAS fellowship or you work for a policymaker, or like I work for the Congressional Research Service, which is like a think tank for Congress, I would write memos, right? So the policymaker would ask me a question. I would then write a memo to answer that question. But the vast majority of science technology policy, like if you work, at any sort of organization outside of that, you're more likely to be doing a policy brief. Another thing that's becoming more common are explainers. So, an explainer might be something like, how does a carbon tax work, or what is direct air capture, or things like that. Then we have sort of news media, op-ed kinds of things, and in that case, we're so we already kind of have a position, but we're trying to really reach the very, very broad public, not just people interested in, say, energy and the environment, but sort of the broader world. So you might see these in the New York Times or the Washington Post, LA Times. I had a student one time who did it in the state paper in Colorado. They tend to be quite short, usually on the order of 600 to 800 words. So over time, I have done all of these things. And so what's important to understand is that different products are appropriate in different situations. And usually the place you work, wherever you're doing is we'll say, okay, we want this kind of document or that kind of document. And sometimes you're going to produce all sorts of different versions, all based on, say, like that policy neutral report. Okay, so here is an example of a memo. You'll see here that, well, it's missing here, but there would be a 2-line up here. That 2 would be to the policymaker. You'd have your subject, who it's from. You have your main point in this first paragraph, which is like an executive summary. There's a bit of background information, but generally speaking, you just want a little bit of background for context, but you don't, the person to whom you're writing, since presumably they asked for it, they're not asking for something really in depth, because if they were, then they'd want an explainer, right? And then you'd have some sort of evidence, like what is it that, you're trying to do. So in this case, it's talking about like uncertainty and high level carbon footprints of electronics. And then you have conclusions and implementation. Typically they're 1 page. As I note here, we don't use color in the real world. I decided I had to put that in just because everything else we have is more colorful, and it is colorful in the real world. But this is something, again, that you maybe have come across in previous kinds of briefings. Okay, so this is an example of a real world policy brief. So this is this West Virginia Bridge Initiative for Science, Technology, Policy Leadership and Communication is somebody I consult for. This policy brief, though, wasn't written by me, but it was written by the postdoc She just actually got her degree at WVU and is now working as a postdoc for the Bridge Initiative. And you'll see here, up here, the title is action oriented. You have these key messages and recommendations, you have some data. And then over here on the left-hand side, you'll see things that, like why things are important and like what can be done. In this case, she decided to include an excerpt from an explainer she did. And the reason this explainer was put together was because there were members of the West Virginia legislature who were attempting to make policy on the forest carbon market, but really did not understand how it worked. And it is a much more complicated process than you might guess if you don't work in that world. And so it was useful to put that together. So here's an example of a science note. So this is from the MOST program, which is the Missouri program, which has a fellowship program and produces a lot of these legislative science notes. And you'll see here that this is about PFAS, which I imagine some of you have heard of. And, you'll see here, it's got like research highlights. It still has a lot of the same kind of things as a policy brief, where it has, it's like key findings and things like that. But if you go here kind of toward the end, you'll see like just more advice. Does not make policy recommendations. It doesn't make conclusions. It's just more findings. This is what the scientific literature is telling us. Now, the question is, what do you use when? So at least, for example, in the West Virginia program, sometimes, we're going to be producing policy briefs like this and that are based on, we have like 20, 30 faculty who worked on this longer report. Who then, said, but we know that policymakers are not going to read a 120 something page report, 125, 150 pages. That's how long it is on carbon dioxide removal. So, we have to break it down to like smaller pieces, more focused. So we have something like this, for example, that's on direct air capture and things like that. So we have a series of these kinds of things. But we're also looking, and I myself am writing my first sort of real science note, only we're going to call them science technology notes. And it's going to be on regulatory like test beds. Am I saying that? Yeah. So this is kind of like a unique policy concept, and people are just going to want to know, like, what is it, right? It's something that they haven't really heard of. So we're not yet trying to make any recommendations or things like that. We're just trying to explain what things are and what's happening in other states, where they're having these, these regulatory sandboxes, that's what they're called. So like, for example, how many of you guys know what a regulatory sandbox is? Anybody? No, of course, right. Not surprising, right? I didn't, until I really started getting into it, I didn't do that. So instead of starting out with something which is well researched and that we know about with a big policy thing, instead what I'm producing is a series of these science technology notes. Like we're going to do like the first one, which is like, what is a regulatory sandbox? And then we're going to have ones like examples of like, here's a regulatory sandbox in energy. Here's one on environmental issues. And here's one on different things. So we're just trying to explain what they are using examples, because it turns out that regulatory sandboxes are something that's used all over the world, but they're relatively new. They only started about 5 or I don't think even 10 years ago in Europe, in the UK, actually. And so at that point, there's just kind of explanation needed. And it's sort of like the same thing almost in a lot of ways with the explainer that Brooke, she's the postdoc, put together, in that people are saying, I just don't understand this stuff. Okay, so both of them are worthy products, but you're going to want to do different ones in different situations. So let me sort of continue on here. So let's get into more of the details about writing a policy brief. So this is just kind of breaking down each of them into the kind of subcategories I talked to. So the first thing is a policy brief title is action oriented. So you'll see here, it starts with an action word, increase, okay? And then you want to end, with something which is a societal benefit. So in this case, your increase, that's what we're proposing to the policymakers. Increase technical assistance for West Virginia family forest owners to enable access to carbon market revenues. And so the theme of this policy brief is that it turns out that about, in this map, and you can see this map here, which is also an important thing to have a real, like a picture or something that really kind of illustrates the situation. You'll see here the green there, most of the family forests, about half of the forest in West Virginia are owned by families. They're not owned by corporations. The corporations are in purple. And of course, some of it is owned by government. So you're trying to, like at a first glance, people want to look at the title and look at the picture and say, oh, this is, your goal is to get them to read it, right? So just like a newspaper headline, if they're not interested in the title, then, and this kind of like image or whatever we have, they're not going to go any further. So it's really important to come up with a good title. And that's why we're going to start with titles today. So imagine if we had just said, instead of saying increased technical assistance, so forth, if we just said family forest in West Virginia, much less interesting, right? So, we would want to, we need to make it something active. It's kind of like our policy pitch. This is the very first thing. This is what's called bottom line up front. This is what we want to recommend happens. Okay, then the next thing here is in the policy, the policy brief. There we go. Is get these sort of bullets, and the bullets kind of give an overview, and they're your findings, your conclusions, your recommendations. So in this case, the finding is that family forest owners face financial barriers and don't have enough information to participate in the forest carbon market. So that's a finding. And then we get into, in this case, sort of the recommendations, the conclusion. There needs to be increased funding to help these forest owners, right? Because a lot of people are approaching them, they can be taken advantage of. Certainly this has happened in the past in the shale gas days. So we need to make sure that that people are helping them, because it's too hard for a family to do. And then we're getting into the more, like kind of recommendations in terms of like action-oriented kinds of things, which in this case, policy actions, which is provide incentives to the forest products industry for long-term carbon storage. So it's important to know that, like building things out of wood, you're going to, it's a good way to store carbon. A lot of people don't really realize that. And that they should, but kind of a warning sign is the need to measure, verify, and report carbon offsets, because again, people can sort of game the system. Okay, then you want some sort of graphic that focuses on something that people care about. And West Virginia is a poor state, and people care about jobs and income because they're losing population. It's one of the poorest states around. And so any investment that is made in West Virginia, like say those tax incentives, has to have some direct impact in terms of job creation. So this is original analysis done as part of the policymaker guide that says, okay, the direct impact is this, you get for natural investments, which is like forest and wetlands, things like that. This is how many jobs you would get. Then you'd have this indirect and induced impact, which is basically like the people who help support, like when you go to a restaurant or something in a neighborhood, do that, and then looking at the total economic impact, which is kind of adding these things together. And then you have taxes and things like that. So if you're a policymaker, and like I said, jobs are number one in a state that has higher unemployment and a decrease in population, then that's the important thing. And then the next part, this is like on the second page of this, which by the way, it will not appear that way in Forefront, because Forefront is just like more like a straight kind of thing, but I like to kind of show it like what it look like in the real world. So this is focusing again on the theme about the family forest landowners, need technical assistance because in order to like work with these forest carbon programs, they need to have a certified forester. Those aren't particularly handy. And then, as I mentioned earlier, then you have this bit of explainer that kind of talks about how these things work. And then the last is what can be done. And then these are the recommendations. So this is kind of a longer version. There's also like 2 other recommendations I kind of cut off here, but these are the different activities that should be done. So it should be something, like I said, it's basically like in the real world, like 1 2-sided page where somebody can quickly look at it. And if they want to know more information, then they can ask. There's information on there, like how to reach out for more information and so forth. Okay, so now let's go to science notes. And these slides I borrowed with her permission for Brittany. So, who is head of the MOST program. We were just on a panel at the AAAS meeting a few weeks ago, and I thought, oh, this is exactly what we need here. And so I asked her, okay, to use them. So the science notes, nonpartisan peer reviewed, and I should say that the documents from which the policy briefs were developed was also peer reviewed. The focus is on trade-off. Basically, trade-offs means the pros and cons, and also thinking about the policies in other states. They have a really good system set up where legislators can request the topics for these science notes, and that's something that we would like to set up in West Virginia. And they're short, non-expert audience. They're free, publicly available on their website. So here again is the one on PFAS, and you'll see here that it has this kind of like, you notice it's not an action-oriented title. It just says like PFAS. But right here, the second part, it says what the scope is. So what people are worried about, of course, is the health impacts of exposure. Then you have these headers with the takeaways, which is basically the concern here that the PFAS can build up in human bodies. And then you have a box, but this box, instead of being sort of findings, conclusions, recommendations, is on research highlights. So basically says that they're used to make everyday products, but they don't break down easily. So because of this, they can build up in humans over time, and it can have negative health effects such as high cholesterol and cancer. Then the next part is basically talking about the trade-offs. Like I said, that's basically the pros and the cons that are related to that. In this case, talking about, actually, I think this is from a different one. No, I guess it must be. But yeah, there's limited on how state policies can affect childcare access. So it's highlighting the limitations. And then like if people want more data, they have this in a supplemental table, which I'm sure you guys are used to from journal articles. And then over here, you'll see that the policy options are in different states. So in this case, for this topic, it's, like you could increase pay for childcare teachers. And so they show how many states do this option. Here are states who have a leave plan, all these different kinds of things. And you would do this as part of the policy analysis, that would support a policy brief. But here, you're just kind of listing all these different options, but you're not doing the analysis to say this option is better than the other option. And, when you're looking at these, like the sources of this, it's peer-reviewed research, government data, nonpartisan think tank. So it's still all evidence-based information, but it is not original analysis. Like you see, for example, in the policy brief, we had original analysis in there that was developed by the folks in West Virginia. Okay, so the next thing I just kind of want to remind you of some of the policy writing principles that we have. So the first is always focus on the societal goal. Sometimes that gets lost. You're doing something for a reason, right? You're doing, I don't know, like say microbiology research because you want to have clean water. You need to always make that connection between what we're trying to do, how we're trying to improve society for whatever the topic it is that we're engaging in. The second thing is that geography really matters in public policy. So, like a carbon dioxide reduction strategy for West Virginia is not going to be the same as for Arizona, right? Very different states, very different geography, very different politics, So you need to really kind of think about what you're focusing on. Is it, it can be sort of the nation as a whole for federal policy, but there's a lot of like really interesting topics at the state and local level where you can actually maybe have more impact and more of a voice than maybe at the national level. The other thing to think about is, are you interested in science technology for policy or policy for science technology? So science and technology for policy would be sort of like almost like a research agenda, right? You're trying to say like, what research should we do on climate change? While policy for science technology would say, okay, well, can direct air capture work in West Virginia, and if so, where? Okay. Now, what we're focusing on here is you taking a more analytical perspective, an evidence-based perspective, as opposed to necessarily being an advocate. So advocacy is perfectly fine, but in advocacy, usually what you do is you really focus on one side. You don't balance it by saying, okay, well, here's the sort of the pros and the cons and things like that. And you'll see even for where we're making recommendations, we're also are talking about, well, here's some of the challenges, with that recommendation. So you want to make sure that, you are evidence-based, really think about the sources that you're using, even for a policy brief, you're still looking at science and technology-based sources, not like what the let's just say what Greenpeace says, right? You're really trying to focus on that evidence, and that's what makes science technology policy writing different than writing for some other areas. Another thing is that policymakers are more than politicians. So, one of the folks writing last year was talking about mental health and graduate students. That's very much a university-based idea. I mean, university policymakers can do more to help the mental health of graduate students. They're policymakers too, right? And so don't feel yourself limited to policymakers at the local, state, or national level. Think of that broader world for whatever your topic is. The next thing, it's really important to find out what stakeholders think. So it shouldn't just be what you think. You should try to look and see what you can find about stakeholders' perspectives. If you're talking like about flooding in Chicago, well, what do the Chicago residents who got flooded, what do they say? What do they think should be done? So try to look for that. The best way is typically news articles, because they'll often interview people who were facing the situation. You can also look for poll data sometimes. It's not always there, but sometimes it's there. And just, and sometimes you can, just ask people, what do they think? So the other sort of key principle is, when you're in the scientific and technical research world, you're often taught only to focus on effectiveness. And so those of you who've heard me talk before, which I know is a number of you, I always say, go beyond that. Talk about efficiency, talk about how much it costs, show why it's going to get the best bang, for the buck. So like we found out in that West Virginia study that natural methods are, like less expensive, but they don't get you as much as potentially direct air capture options. But the downside of direct air capture is that it's very expensive. And so those are things that you want to illustrate and show. You also want to talk about equity issues. Equity issues is like who wins, who loses, who is really the most impacted by the policy that you're trying to help, or what policy options, like who's that going to help the most. So if we're switching to like electric vehicles, what about all those mechanics who only know how to repair gasoline vehicles? They're going to be losers, right? So you need to acknowledge them and try to incorporate their needs into your policy. And then you want to think also about ease of political acceptability. It's great to propose something like a carbon tax, but once you see the reaction of even a relatively small increase in the gasoline prices due to like the Ukrainian war, you say, how realistic is it for us to have a carbon tax? So you want to incorporate that into your thinking. And the last thing here is that bottom line up front. I think that's really hard. I work with, say, faculty, for example, and that I think is one of the hardest things I'll do. I'll have them do like a 1-minute policy pitch, and I tell them bottom line up front, they got to do the things, and almost every one of them, like this is just relatively recently, on the last line, that's where they have their bottom line. And so I said, take the last sentence, put it at the front, and they all agreed as soon as they did that, their message was better. But we're not, again, taught to do that in that sort of scientific and technical world. Think more like a newspaper article. Okay, so with that, we're going to go into our breakout session here. I think we still have time for that, right, Sam? Yeah, good. So this, I just picked this sort of title out just to kind of give you an example here, which is the rise of the robots is inevitable if Google and Facebook won't say who is behind their clicks, right? You really get that message, from that headline. And that's even though it's a long title, it's important to do. What I do when I write my titles is first I just kind of like write it down, and I will tell you it's almost always like way too long. That's okay, because then I always say you want it to make sure it's less than 10 words for a policy brief at least, and the shorter the better. But sometimes it's hard to kind of get everything in the title. Like a 4-word title is not necessarily going to say very much, so you need to have something kind of in between. But what I do is I have my long version at the top, and I keep iterating and iterating and iterating, and I talk to people, and then finally come out with something that works. So here's what I did is I put together these titles. So these are from the last year's competition, and these are ones that I thought were good titles. Like here's one: improve Detroit's air quality to protect the health of urban residents, right? So it's the societal goal is very clear, right? And the action is clear. The second one here about expand U.S. federal funding for reproductive health choices in disadvantaged women. Right. So the action is clear. The people you're trying to help is clear. And this last one here, establish evaluation metrics for community violence intervention programs in Baltimore City. So again, the action is quite clear. Who you're trying to help is quite clear. You know that the goal here is to reduce violence in Baltimore. And by the way, I presume Baltimore City must be different than Baltimore. I wonder why they put Baltimore City in case. Okay, so here are some examples of some of the science note titles that I got off of the most page. You'll see here that it's it's kind of like a subtle way. I mean, there's no action on here, but it's a little bit clearer because they'll say something like this one: Missouri Electric Bill Reduction Assistance Act. So it's clear that the societal goal here is to reduce the cost of electricity for people in Missouri, right? But there's no action item here. It doesn't say reduce electrical cost for Missouri people or something, Missouri residents, right? That would be more like a policy brief title. In this case, the next one here, maternal mortality and health disparities. Again, it's clear that there is like a difference, that there's a problem, but it's less explicit. And then a police accountability measure is the same thing, right? So there's concerns about violence related to police. The measures aren't quite working. Here's sort of some ideas, but again, you can see the difference between the two. So I think probably before we do the breakout sessions, I want to make a quick check-in to see if we have any questions. Okay, and you can raise your hand or you can put it in chat. I'm gonna try to get out of this. There we go. Okay, any questions at all from anybody? Okay, great. Okay, so we're going to go ahead, and it is 7:25. I'm thinking maybe we can do, say, 15 minutes. Is that okay? Do you think? We still have Rachel to at the end. So let's just go to, that would be 7:40 Eastern. I need to mention that because we're from one place. Okay, so we'll give you like 15 minutes, and we'll break you up into groups and just to kind of brainstorm your titles. And then what I would like you to do is come back and just type them into chat. And then we're going to go to Rachel, and then she's going to talk about how to submit your titles. I mean, how to submit your submissions at the end, sorry. Okay, so I think, yeah, oh yeah.
Those rooms are now open, so you should be able to join those. We'll see you in 15.
Okay.
Do you want us going to a room?
Yeah, well, it's really up to you. Do you want to go to a room?
I can.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So Sam, you're handling that? Okay. Okay, we have Payush. Maybe you should just put her in a room. Him or her, I don't
I
know.
wonder if he stepped away and
Okay,
just didn't see the breakout room pop up.
yeah.
You might want to move the person who's in that breakout room though.
Yeah, I just split those rooms up.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't really.
Did we have people leave when we
Yeah.
started the break? I
It's
always
always-
do
it's
that
always that
on
way.
I always do that on webinars. I always leave if they put me in a breakout room if I'm not paying
Yeah,
good
but
attention.
there's one that's only 2 people. I guess it's probably too late to move folks, but at least I guess it's gonna.
Yeah, the others have Natalia's in one and Josh is in the other. So
Oh, okay, well, that's good. Yeah. Okay.
those are-
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll at least have two people to kind of talk to each other. So, okay. So, okay, otherwise?
yeah,
Yes. Okay, here we go. Establish an advisory committee to investigate best practice in science communication during a public health emergency. Good. Establishing regulations regarding end-of-life operations for satellite constellations to protect national security assets. Good. Improving scientific communication for the pandemic and public health crisis to come. Good. By the way, though, the only thing I'll say is I'm not a big fan of ing words. Like I would say improve scientific communication, not improving. That's a very common thing that people do. So far so good. Like others, please continue to put them in. But now we're going to pass it over to Rachel.
Okay, well, great to see that people are brainstorming what your topics are going to be. So I'm just going to walk you through really briefly here how you're going to submit the articles and kind of get you oriented to the Forefront website. So I'm going to pull up my screen here. Open you guys back up so I can see you all too. Okay, so Forefront is a publication on Medium. Medium is a blogging platform. So it's nice because when we publish things on our specific page on Medium, it also gets pumped out to all the other Medium users, even if they aren't subscribed to us. And we get about half of our traffic on our articles just from organic views from Medium, and about half because people click on a link on Twitter or something like that. So we get some pretty good viewership, and it helps to amplify outside of the science policy community by having it on the Medium platform. So a couple of things to look at here. So this is our main page. So if you go to medium.com/scitech-forefront, that is how you find us. And this will be linked to as well on the NSPN page. So you'll be able to see it up here. Couple things here. So NSPN competition here at the top, that's going to have all the briefs from last year's competition, and eventually will be where this year's competition is published as well. Under the editor's picks, we're going to highlight the winners from last year, but you can also look at those on the NSPN landing page as well. And then what I want to walk you through today is how to submit your briefs. And so you're going to submit your briefs or science notes in the same way that anybody would submit their articles on Medium. So first of all, before I get to the submit page, so you're going to click on submit on our website. That's going to take you through the instructions and the form. But before you do that, somebody on your team is going to need to create a Medium profile. And so that'll be the first step, is when you get onto Medium, go to medium.com, you can create a free author profile, and then you're going to have to submit through that, that author profile. It doesn't allow for co-authors, but we have a way that you can list them on the brief itself. So then after you create your brief, you are actually going to, let me just take you this, I didn't prepare for this, I should have. I'm going to go to my page real fast. So you are going to have to create a draft article, and so we're on my writer profile right now. And then, so you're going to write an article. It's going to come up as a draft. And then you don't want to hit publish. Instead, what you're going to do is you are going to click on these three dots. I will often, if you send questions to Sam and he directs them to me, I'm going to say, click on the three dots in the top right corner. And so you'll click on these dots to find a lot of different menu options. But you want to share your draft link, and that draft link is going to go directly into the submission form. So you'll enter things into your brief. As you're entering in, you're going to notice that it's not super easy to manipulate things around. We have a formatting guide on our submission page that will help you kind of figure out how to bold and italicize and use different headers and fonts and things like that. But for the most part, it's going to be, one column all the way through. You can add images and graphs that are going to be there kind of in a block form. So they're not going to be in line with the text. They'll just be there as you scroll. Okay, so then that's how you would create your article. So now I'm going to go back to the forefront page. So when you click submit, we talk about what our publication is, some of the perks of Medium. For instance, you retain ownership of your work, and so you can republish this anywhere else. If JSPG allows it, you can take it and adapt it to something to submit to Journal of Science Policy and Governance, to a local newspaper. Wherever this could be reused, you can republish this. Also, it means if you've published a brief somewhere else, you can adapt that and post it on Medium as well, as long as the place where you published it allows you to do so. For this competition, there's two types of submissions that you'll use. So if you're doing a traditional policy brief, then you'll enter that under analysis. And then if you're doing a science note, that'll be a fact sheet. And so there's a little bit of an example here that shows you the types of submissions. It talks about our review process. So the first round of review will be through the Forefront associate editors. We don't do, a complete peer review. We don't do copy editing, but we do look through, make sure that you have science-based content and that you've cited things where needed. And then there's also some other quick kind of formatting and stylistic editing that we do as well. So that'll be the first round of review. It talks through that process here. This will also be on the NSPN website. And then at the bottom of this page is our submission form. And then I'm going to take you over to this page. So you're going to submit through this Google form. On the first page, you'll add your personal information. You will just have to list your primary author here, or whoever is the one who's submitting it. I mentioned you have to create a Medium page. Make sure that you populate that Medium page. A common thing that we sent back to authors last year was, your Medium page doesn't say anything about you. How are we supposed to know about your credibility as an author? And so make sure when you build out your Medium page, you also include a brief bio, and a photo is nice, just so that way we know who you are as an author. And then we also have you list your personal website or your LinkedIn page. The social media handles are completely optional. That's so that we can tag you on social media when we publish your article. Then hit next. So here on the second page of the submission process, you'll see sort of that same guide for the types of submissions that I showed you on the submit page on the website. Click on the type of submission that best fits your article. And then here, this is special for the competition. So there are going to be 2 questions. Are you part of the science policy writing competition? Click yes or no. Hopefully you know the answer to that question when you get there. And then in order to win, as Sam mentioned, or in order to be part of the competition, you have to be an active member of NSPN. And so you are going to certify when you submit your brief that you and all of your co-authors are members of NSPN. And Sam can help navigate if you have any questions about that. Then you go ahead and you pick the tags that best represent your category. Tags is a term that is terminology that Medium uses to categorize your articles. So click the one that best fits your article, or one. I don't know if we list how many. I would say between like 1 and 4 that best fit your article. And then I remember we copied that draft link for the Medium article, and then you're going to post that here. This is how we're going to review your article, is through the draft article on Medium. So it's really important that you pull that from your Medium profile and that article. So you're not going to send us a Google Doc. You're not going to send us a Word document attached to an email. You're going to send us that link to that draft on Medium. And then we just ask a couple more questions at the bottom there, and that's it. So fairly easy submission process. We'll probably send you some follow-up questions just so NSPN can collect some more demographic information and more information about the people who are part of the contest. But this is how you'll submit to Forefront. And I'll go ahead and pause there. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer those. And then I think Debbie and Sam are both still here too, so they can answer questions about the competition in general as well.
Yeah, one thing, Rachel, maybe you could mention is when it's multi-authored, like how do you handle that part? Because I think that came up a lot last year.
Yeah, so let me show you an example of that. So while you can't put multiple authors on the article itself, so as you see here, like there's going to be just one author that shows when you first click on the article, or when the article is posted on the Medium page. But let's see if I could find our competition winners. I should have been prepared here. Someone who had more than one author. I think Kelsey's had more than one author. So, oh yeah, and this is Natalia's. So what we would do, so this is going to be in the title box, and then this is the subtitle of the Medium draft. And so you can, I mean, this is all optional, like to add all authors contributed equally. If you want to add your affiliations, feel free. We have some authors who do that, but you can list all the names right there underneath the title on the Medium page.
Okay.
And this is kind of what I was talking about. So your pictures are going to be in line, but I think it makes it pretty easy to read through on the website. And then citations, I'll also mention that since I have this open. Inline citations that are hyperlinked are the preferred way to do your citations. You can do like superscripts and listed citations at the bottom, but this is really the most easy to read and access the information that you're citing.
And I think it's preferred by like people like me who actually read these things,
Mhm.
because I will almost always go back and look at the original source, and it's so much easier for me to click than to click something, go to the bottom, click something there, and then I lose track of what it was that I was asking for and things like that. So one thing I'll say about the Medium platform, which I have been using for quite a while before even we established Forefront, is that it's very, very easy to use. It is like, even somebody like me who has absolutely no ability to format, it's so easy to put in an article with pictures and graphics and things like that. To me, it's very well designed to do that aspect of it. And so, I think that's always really, important to, like, it takes you more time to do those paper versions that I showed you, where we're trying to get them lined up on a sheet. That takes me hours and hours, but this takes me like no time at all. It's so much easier as a way to read it. But unfortunately, you cannot leave a web page at a policymaker's office. You do have to have like a leave behind, which is like a piece of paper. Like we say, we still have to use paper sometimes. Okay, Sam, so maybe we want to just open it up for any questions people have on anything.
Yeah, so if you have questions, feel free to unmute or type it in the chat. And I think Joshua and Natalia are still here. So if you want to bounce anything off of our previous winners while they're here, it's a great opportunity. And while you're thinking about that, I just want to plug a couple of upcoming dates.
Oh yeah, we had a
too.
question though, Miles.
Oh, did you get one come through? I didn't see
Yes,
it online.
Miles.
Yeah,
There.
I was
Go
just
ahead.
curious, how specific would you recommend making our strategies at the end of our brief? Like, do you recommend suggesting policy ideas or supporting specific bills, for example?
I always recommend not identifying specific bills. And I don't know if you know this, but like bill numbers only last for that session. So, and sometimes people don't realize that like each congressional session, for the US Congress is like 2 years. And so the numbers, the titles, everything changes. And so what it means is you have a very short life. For state legislatures, like in West Virginia, it's like a year, even like 2 months or something. It's a very, very short period of time, which is when the state, like the West Virginia state legislature meets. So, it's best, the thing you always have to keep in mind that if you put it, if for some reason you feel you need to put in a bill number, like for example, I just did one, but it was from a law that passed. And so therefore, people could click through it and they would kind of like still see it. But if you put like HR 2517, it's going to be something different the next session. It might be HR 2156 or something. So generally speaking, I don't recommend focusing on like bills that way. I don't know, Rachel, do you want to add something?
I was just going to add that if you're trying to list some examples, so oftentimes it's helpful, like if you were proposing something to the Missouri state legislature, you might say that a similar bill was introduced in Iowa with like this policy option. And so I think if you were citing it as an example, you could link directly to the bill text that was introduced, because that should stay archived on the state legislature website or the federal like congress.gov. And then I would just hyperlink it. So that way you're not referencing the exact bill in text, that you are instead like saying the state that it came from or something like that, or like see this example from the 118th Congress or something like that.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So that would be what you'd have to do, in the 118th Congress.
Because it is really helpful for lawmakers to see specific language.
Yeah.
Like if they're going to write a bill on something, then they want to see if there's been specific language introduced in the past. But yeah, try not to put the exact like numbers in text. You want to like hyperlink to them as an example.
Right. And the other thing that's also useful for them to know that you can only get through the hyperlink is who are the co-sponsors, right? So say that, somebody previously introduced a bill on, I don't know, legalizing marijuana or something. And they can, if they click on that bill link, like in congress.gov, then they can see all those co-sponsors and say, oh, my buddy next door, it turns out he co-sponsored this. I'm going to go knock on his door or something. So, any other questions? Did that help, by the way, that answer your question, Miles? Yeah. Great.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Okay.
One thing
Yeah.
that came up in the breakout room I was in was kind of the scope of the brief, and kind of a global versus national versus state level. I know it's the National Science Policy Network. Do you guys have a strong feeling about that?
You mean, focusing on global policy versus national policy?
Yeah.
All right, my dog is having problems over here. Yeah, so I don't, for the purpose of our competition, we don't really care. The only thing I will say is that I get a lot of people, that I work with who are interested in, say, climate change. Climate change is too big of a topic to do the whole thing, right? So just realistically, if you want to try to impact public policy, you have to narrow it down a lot. Because otherwise, it's no good, to do something like that. So Rachel, do you want to add something?
Yeah, and then the only thing I would add is that, so when I teach science policy, I let my students choose what scope they want to look at. And what I look for when I'm grading, or like when you're judging it, is, does it make sense? Does the audience and the policy options and the format that you chose have agreement? And so, like, if you're focusing on a national issue, are your policy options politically feasible at the national level? If you're focusing on a state issue, is it feasible at the state level? Are you writing to a state level audience? And so you just want to make sure that you are thinking about the scope and throughout your policy brief, and being realistic about what's feasible at different scopes.
Okay, any last questions? I know my poor puppy dog here.
Yeah, just a quick question. So is it preferable to go to pick topics that are more topical?
Yes. Yeah. Because, the policy world is very event driven, so like, for example, this year, and Rachel knows this better than anybody, the Farm Bill is coming up, right? So there's lots of issues related to the Farm Bill, more than just like farming per se, right? Biofuels, all sorts of different things. So it's really good to kind of look for things that are relevant. But you should still, as one of our winners last year said, you should still be something you should be passionate about, right? So if it's not relevant now, maybe it'll be relevant in a few years. So don't just pick something relevant just because it's relevant. In the end, passion is more important than relevancy.
I didn't hear all of Natalia at what she talked about at the beginning, but they published that, or submitted that brief before the Dobbs decision at the Supreme Court. And then we reached out right away saying, can we publish this sooner? Because this is, an important, timely topic. So it just happened to be that, I don't know if you guys were like thinking about Supreme Court cases when you picked that topic, or if it was just something that you were passionate about.
We were actually going to do a Supreme Court type thing, and we were like, this seems like way too much to tackle, kind of like narrowing down your topic. So we ended up going for state, local versus federal. But yeah, that's just an example.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also with state and local, I really encourage that, because you're really filling a niche, right? There's, like we were just, again, I'm just focusing on West Virginia because I work with them so much, is that there's like the legislators say, look, there's nobody giving us information other than lobbyists, right? And, they obviously can't trust that, but if it's all you have, it's all you have. And so your likelihood of being able to take what you do, like for this policy brief or science or whatever, and turn it into an op-ed for your local newspaper or the statewide newspaper, like some of my students have done, that's pretty high. Right. So your chance of having impact and getting your message out is a lot higher. And realistically, most innovative policy starts at the state and local level, not at the national level. So this is the topic that Rachel and I are quite passionate about. We've been working on this for years and years, because and that's why we've worked on state science and technology policy fellowship programs, is because, I worked for decades at the national level and I really enjoyed it. But there's also a lot of, like you can really kind of see the impact at state and local level.
And just as a final note, I mean, that's part of the reason why there are professional development funds or prize money, as part of the competition. It is both to thank you and support you for participating and doing the work, but it can be a springboard to doing more with your work, whether that's professional development for yourself and your team, to develop your writing skills, or to travel so that you can actually speak to people that are going to be the policymakers that might make movement on your idea. So something to keep in mind, that this, in addition to all that other great advice, it should be something that you want to continue working on, because we hope that you will be able to take it and do more with it down the line. And that's why Medium and Forefront are a great platform, because you can take it and do more with it afterwards. I know we're coming up on our time, but any final questions? I did put some other milestone dates in the chat, particularly those open office hours. That'll be a time to come and actually workshop with your progress closer to submission deadline. So if you have those last minute questions, whether it's about submitting or getting feedback on things like your title and your overall structure, save those dates. They'll be up on our website soon to register, so you can get all the registration links, and there's a couple additional registration questions about what you're working on. And then in July, we'll actually have an event for incorporating feedback from the Forefront editors. So learning how to take that, the feedback from those editors, and incorporating that to submit your final brief. So that'll be another opportunity to keep working on things. In addition, we'll keep promoting other NSPN events that are about writing, and particularly planning on some events to talk about how to get some attention for your writing. So social media advice, ways to share with your network so that people are seeing your briefs once they're and science notes once they're actually published on Forefront, and getting people's eyes on them as much as possible. So keep an eye out for all of those opportunities. The website's going to be your best friend in keeping track of all of that, because we'll keep those opportunities posted there, so that check back regularly on the competition website to see what's going on. But with that, any other questions? Sorry, go ahead, Debbie.
Sorry. So I just want to emphasize that Rachel and I will be at these office hour things that we're having. So it's something where people did find it, I think, quite useful last year, particularly like when you're in a group and some people think this or some people think that. Sometimes we can help you, like sort that out, or like say if you just want to like test something out. Like a graphic, sometimes people have difficulty with that, or like a title, or any of those kinds of things. So we'll be available for all those different activities. So okay, well, great. Well, thanks to everybody for coming.
So
Thank
just
you.
one quick question. Sorry. So this specific to this competition. So should the topic like for Miss which should be specific to the US, or can be like Miss outside?
It can be anywhere in the world. Yeah. So yeah. So if you like when I was a professor at Carnegie Mellon, I had students from all over the world. I remember one was in Ghana, and e-waste was a big issue in Ghana. I guess e-waste from all over the world goes to Ghana. That was a great topic. It was something that he really knew about, and was relevant to him. And again, being passionate about a project, about your topic, is really important. So yeah, there's no restrictions in terms of geographic location. In fact, you'll see, like if you go to the Forefront website, there's some policy briefs that I wrote for an organization called the Clean Cooking Coalition, and they are in Africa and India and Mexico. So yeah, so feel free to do that.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other last questions? Okay, great. Thanks again, everybody.
We'll see you all soon. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.